All right. Now, Reverend Cathy is going to talk to us about something magnificent. Let's welcome her.
Wow, that was amazing. Thank you so much. Beautiful. The subject tonight is love, and for tomorrow night as well. As a matter of fact, I know of no better topic for us to discuss until we all die. These words were written by the 14th century poet, Sufi poet, Hafiz, and I'm with him. There's no better topic to discuss than love, because it's the glue that holds this universe together. So I'm always happy when February arrives and I see that our theme, our central theme for Centers for Spiritual Living, always pertains to love. But you know, whenever Valentine's Day rolls around, it's troubling to many people who complain, oh, it's so commercial, or it's painful for me because I'm single. I'm a widow now. Or I feel so much pressure. And I have to admit that I found it really hysterically funny because I happened to be in Walmart on Friday, Valentine's Day, watching men desperately clutching whatever flowers or chocolate or cards were left. The shelves had been picked over. But they were clutching them and they were in the line. They were like, okay. That's pressure. That is pressure. And it made me remember the one time in our marriage that my husband forgot Valentine's Day. And his face turned ashen. I got up in the morning and I had my little, probably chocolates, knowing my husband, and card, and happy Valentine's Day, sweetheart. And the face turned ashen in front of me, and I immediately knew that he had forgotten. And I told him, that's okay, you know, because those of you who remember my husband know that he showed his love for me every single day. Wasn't a big deal if he forgot Valentine's Day, but for him, he was mortified. He was mortified, and he acted really as if he had committed a mortal sin. And I lived off of that for a good year to come. It was great. But it was in that moment that I realized how torturous Valentine's Day can be for some people, and I remembered feeling really sorry about that. Because, again, for Valentine's Day, the focus has always been on romantic love. But if you think about love, that's only a small portion of the love that we experience. Most of our lives revolve around other expressions of love. The love of our family, the love of friends, the love of our health, the love of our prosperity, the love of our center, possessions, country, on and on ad infinitum. Yeah. In reality, most of what we do takes place in this invisible, all-encompassing field of love. That is the energy that surrounds us and fills us when we notice it. And it takes many forms in everyday life. Love can show up as gratitude, love can show up as appreciation, enthusiasm, loyalty, forgiveness, respect, again, etc., as the king would say in The King and I, etc., 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 ad infinitum. You can think about all of the actions in which love is found and where the roots of love come forth. And by recognizing that love does prevail in everyday life, our capacity to love increases. And the Reverend Dr. Michael Gott, who wrote the daily guides in our Science of Mind magazine for February, asked us to consider Valentine's Day just as a chance to love, period. No rules. And that's the way I think it should be. I think it should be a day to remind us to love one another in the myriad ways that love is possible. It should also be a day to remember that we are all individuations of love itself. Not just on Valentine's Day, but every day. And you know what? I like Valentine's Day. Even the poor widow who has no flowers likes, I love it. I like the giving and receiving texts and calls, and yes, even real paper valentines. It reminded me that I am loved and I am loving. Love is immeasurable, deep, boundless, and limitless. And that sounds like I'm describing God, and that's because I am describing God, because God is love and love is God. They are indivisible. Now, this is how Albert Einstein, he's my favorite scientist, because he was a scientist to the core, but he was also a believer. He was faith-based to the core. And this is the letter he wrote to his daughter, defining love. He said, love is an extremely powerful force. It is a force that includes and governs everything. And it is even behind any phenomenon operating in the universe. And then he repeats, this universal force is love. He says, when scientists looked for a unified theory of the universe, they forgot the most powerful unseen force. He said, love is light because it enlivens those who give and receive it. Love is gravity because it makes people feel attracted to one another. Love is power because it multiplies the best we have and allows humility and humanity not to be extinguished in their blind selfishness. Love unfolds and love reveals. For love explains everything and gives meaning to life. He said this is the variable we have ignored for too long, maybe because we're afraid of love, because it's the only energy in the universe that man has not learned to drive at will. Sigmund Freud once admitted in a letter to Carl Jung that psychoanalysis is essentially a cure through love. Yet, while many psychotherapists might privately agree that love has some kind of a role, to me it has a major role in the healing process, but the word love is curiously absent from all therapeutic literature. And the same is true for the word heart. Not only is this term missing from the psychological literature, but the psychological literature, the tone itself, lacks heart. And this too is sad, because from my experience as a counselor for so many years, counseling and therapy is all about opening people's hearts and helping them recognize and get rid of those past beliefs that say they're not lovable, and help them to recognize their value and their inherent and intrinsic worth and their lovability, if you will. If we neglect our heart, we neglect our connection to God, because our heart is a direct presence that allows complete attunement to reality. Within our heart is the capacity to touch and be touched, to both reach out and to let in. And our heart expresses this twofold language in several ways, this twofold activity, which is like a swinging door that opens in both directions. For example, we might say, my heart went out to him. Or we might say, I took her into my heart. Or I hold you in my heart when we're praying for someone. And like that, our physical organ that has both systolic and diastolic pressure, the heart mind involves both receptive letting be, letting in, letting be, and the active going out to meet or being with. In their different ways, both psychological and spiritual, these works both remove the barriers to these two movements of the heart. It's kind of like oiling a door so that it can open freely in both directions. We're talking about self-love. And what shuts down the heart more than anything is not letting ourselves have our own experience, but instead judging it, criticizing it, or trying to make it different from what it is. We often imagine that there's something wrong with us if we feel angry or needy or dependent or lonely or confused or sad or scared. And we all feel that way sometimes, several times a day. We often place conditions on ourselves and our experience. And I'd say to myself, if I feel like this, there must be something wrong with me. I can only accept myself if my experience conforms to my standard of how I should be. And where do those standards come from? Do they come from within? They come from the outside. They come from our mother yelling at us in a voice that we can't stand. They come from our teacher telling us that we will never be what we said we wanted to be. You know, it comes from the outside. We got to wade through that. And sometimes this experience, this leads us to using the science of mind teaching against ourselves. Oh my God, I'm having a negative thought. Shoot me. Or, oh shoot. Look what I've created. I can't do anything right. We've all been there, and it's not fun, but that is not the intention of this teaching, to make us feel less than or guilty for some of the experiences in our lives. The intention is rather for us to accept and love ourselves as perfectly imperfect expressions of God, knowing that just our mere existence is proof that we're loved. The intention is for us to live our lives in love as we learn to forgive and release any hold the past may have had on us, as we learn to accept and cherish the present moment, and as we learn to create our future through our awareness of the unity with the beloved and our co-creative powers with this loving force. Rumi wrote, "The wound is the place where the light shines in." And this same principle, I love that. The wound is the place where the light enters in, shines in. And this same principle appears in many spiritual traditions. For example, the Native Americans, in their bead work and their weaving, the artist often includes an intentional flaw, to acknowledge that all human effort may appear to be imperfect, and believing that the flaw in the blanket is the gate through which spirit enters. Likewise, many Persian carpet weavers also make an imperfect stitch out of respect for the divinity, saying only Allah can be perfect. And in Japan, kintsugi artists use gold to fill the cracks of broken pottery, transforming brokenness into wholeness. In these ways, human imperfection is viewed not as a sin or an impediment, but as a gateway for grace. The Sufis believe that there are three journeys we all take. There are the journey from God, the journey to God, and the journey in God. And day by day, we are taking our journey, those of us who are believers and come to Centers for Spiritual Living, we are taking our journey in God. And it is so much easier when we love ourselves as God loves us while we're traveling. God is love, and the journey to love is our deepest calling. Again, words from Rumi, who's really the world's greatest love poet. He said, in the end, a person tires of everything except hearts desiring, souls journeying. Sultan, saint, pickpocket, love has everyone by the ear, dragging us to God by secret ways. I love his humor. I love the image, especially that metaphor of being dragged by the ear, as we learn the lessons that bring us, slowly but surely, closer to God, closer to love. And as we learn to love ourselves more, the dragging by the ear becomes less and less painful, until instead of being dragged, we find ourselves freely running into the embrace of spirit, accepting our good and embodying our oneness. When we think of self-love, we often think of our physical bodies, as Susan pointed out today in her creative thought, our senses. But the dictionary defines self as the set of someone's characteristics, such as personality or ability, that are not physical and make that person different from all people. So that might be our essential self, but still, our difficulties with loving ourselves often center around our physicality. I'm confessing here, I'm often challenged by the notion that my body is a beautiful reflection of God on this planet. I've told this story before, forgive me, Doug, but it's so perfect. Of the day when my husband and I, both naked, we had two sinks in our master bathroom and one mirror. And we both wandered in naked and found ourselves in front of the mirror, and my husband, in only the voice that Doug could use, said, "Well, it's a good thing that we love each other." followed by, I have man boobs. Yes, honey, you have man boobs. We know that we are bombarded by the media, by society's definitions of what constitutes physical beauty, defined by size, hair texture, shades of skin color, prominence of features, amount of wrinkles, and every day we're invited to compare ourselves negatively to the images of defined beauty that are projected into our consciousness in so many insidious ways. Modern media presents the body, as it does in many other aspects of life, as something flawed and in need of fixing. God knows, don't you, God, how the struggle I've had with accepting my various weights and now my various heights since I'm shrinking. I've displayed several during this life's incarnation. I was not happy with myself, and I really felt horrible when I was 80 pounds plus heavier. And I certainly was not healthier. But today, when people tell me how beautiful I look, I find myself shaking my head in wonder. Because when you lose this amount of weight at 72 years of age, the skin does not bounce back as it used to. It just kind of stays there. Hello, here I am, sagging and drooping, unfazed by any amount of physical exercise I might do. You know how a balloon looks when you blow it up and then you deflate it? You got the picture. I'm really proud of myself of taking the necessary steps to retain my health and vitality. But the truth is that there's a lot of places on my body, like the Japanese pottery, that might be improved by some gold paint. And this is where the word karma takes on deep meaning for me. Because when I was younger and sure I knew everything, I used to make fun of my mother, who, by the way, was always petite and beautiful in my eyes. But she refused, as she aged, to leave the house without wearing long sleeves, because her arms had gone flabby. Now I remember, oh my God, you're so vain. I remember telling my mother that. Who do you think is looking at your arms anyway? And now, as I am frantically weeding through my wardrobe to find garments that have long sleeves, I find myself conversing out loud to my mom, who I'm sure is cavorting, bare-armed and happily on the other side. I'll say, I'm so sorry, Mom, I'm so sorry. I was so judgmental of your own self-judgment. I get it now. I'm right there with you. God bless long sleeves. And this is ironic, because I truly have no judgment about other women my age who proudly display their bare arms in public. In fact, I admire them for choosing comfort over vanity. And I find that wrinkles adorning the faces of otherwise women my age are actually quite beautiful. It's only me, myself, and I that I criticize. And in doing that, I am my own worst enemy. So I'm challenged by this. I'm also challenged by my own self-talk about my other perceived imperfections that may be on the mental side and not the physical side. And I realized that I would not talk to my worst enemy, if I had a worst enemy, the way I talk to myself in my lowest moments, these moments when the unity with my divinity is completely forgotten, when I've been engaged in the futile act of comparison, the outcome of which is always deeming myself less than someone else. So once again, I'm a perfect illustration of we teach what we need to learn most. Because being immersed in ministry causes me to be aware, causes me to constantly self-reflect. And I'm constantly also getting these spiritual nudges, or what I call love notes from God, that bring me back to the truth. And the truth is that each of us is perfect exactly the way we are right now, today. That does not mean we might not want things to change or evolve, or we might not be open to looking at things and doing things differently. But it does mean that right now in this moment, I am God's whole and perfect child, in whom God is well pleased. Everybody. My body, like everything else material and tangible, is the body of God expressing on this plane. And it is such, it is not something to be apologized for or excused, but rather something to be celebrated for its beauty and its power and its strength and its ability to house the infinite. My body is the vehicle that God's driving around in. So a few dents is not going to hurt it. It's still going to drive well. My body is the vehicle that God drives around in. It houses my soul so that I may engage and interact with everything around me. My body then should be respected and celebrated for the perfect way it houses me. And I'm working on this every day in my spiritual practice. I really love this excerpt from a poem by Nayyirah Waheed. This is just an excerpt. She wrote, "And I said to my body, softly, I want to be your friend. It took a long breath and replied, I have been waiting for this my whole life." Our bodies are intelligent manifestations of the divine, and they deserve to be listened to, cared for, respected, appreciated, and loved. The Science of Mind text tells us that the body expresses intelligence, and its apparent intelligence being lent by the consciousness which permeates it. The physical body is evolved for the purpose of allowing consciousness to function on this plane. And in a book called The Body is Not an Apology, written by Sonia Renee Taylor, she writes, "Concepts like self-acceptance and body neutrality are not without value. When you have spent your entire life at war with your body, these models offer a truce. But you can have more than a ceasefire. You can have radical self-love because you are radical self-love. So I'm declaring a truce with my body, and who knows, maybe someday you might see my arms bared proudly."
Go for it.
Not today. Self-love starts with loving our bodies, but it does not end there by any means. It continues with embodying the understanding that self-love means self-care, and self-care is not selfish, but rather is the pragmatic realization that when I'm running on fumes, I can be no use to anyone else. I might have great aspirations to be there for my friend, or to volunteer for a good cause, or maybe even heal the world, but I can do nothing when I am depleted internally. So self-care is essential. It's essential to the healing of the world. Making ourselves the center of our attention does not mean that we're narcissistic or conceited. It means that we're building a solid relationship with ourselves. And when we do that, this enables us to know and understand others better. Self-love also means that we know that we are the loving awareness that came from pure consciousness, and that we are a physical extension of source energy. It's the acceptance that we are enough. Just as we are, nothing is lacking. It's the realization that we came here with gifts to give and strengths to share. And it is the agreement to stop comparing ourselves to others or measuring our accomplishments against an impossible, unrealistic scale. It's the willingness to be a good steward of our gifts, to acknowledge them as we gently and lovingly cultivate them. Self-love is learning to interpret and follow the intuitive language of our hearts. It's the freedom from outside influences, conditioning and programming, and the recognition of our truth and what it is we stand for. And the willingness to stand up and speak our word for what it is that we stand for. It's the strength and the ability to forgive ourselves for our own shortcomings and to forgive others for theirs, knowing, as Ram Dass taught us, that we're all just walking each other home. It's the courage to move forward and to welcome the blessings that come when we see ourselves as worthy and deserving of both giving and receiving love. It's allowing ourselves to just be, embracing our uniqueness or our weirdness, whichever one we choose to refer to it, and loving ourselves just as we are in the moment. Self-love is doing the things that make us happy, that make us feel creative and inspired and passionate. And self-love is self-compassion, being kind to your minds by choosing thoughts that create more appreciation for ourselves and gratitude for who and what we are. And lastly, it is seeing ourselves in others, believing that we are connected and interconnected with everyone, and respecting that everyone's level of individual awareness and understanding may differ from ours, and that's okay. So I want to close this talk with a treatment. So please join me in knowing that there is only one God, one life, one love. I am therefore love, and what is true of me is true for each and every other expression of the divine. We are all made of God stuff, therefore we are each made of love. I now affirm and I declare that love in action calls forth love. Nothing that is experienced as unlike love can coexist with love. So in this moment, all such experiences are neutralized, dissolved, and recede into the fog of forgotten memories. All that remains is love. Love in action is expressed in myriad forms. It is disseminated and shared boundlessly. I'm so grateful knowing that I have spoken the truth as love, about love. And in the words of Hough that I opened with, I know of no better topic for us to discuss until we all die. I am grateful to live love. So I gratefully release my word right now, knowing the power of this prayer is already in action, and that each of us feels the deep self-love that increases our ability to love one another more deeply and more fully. And so it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Cathy. That was something I really needed to hear today.